Thank you. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Han-Sen Zhong from University of Science and Technology of China. In the research group of Professor Jianwei Pan and Professor Chaoyang Lu. Here I thank the organizer for the opportunity to share our recent progress, photon-based quantum advantage. We realized a Gaussian boson sampling experiment which is 14 orders of magnitude faster than classical supercomputer. Why we need to realize quantum computational advantage? Similar to the local hidden variable model, the extended Church-Turing thesis says that any physically realizable system can be efficiently simulated on a Turing machine. To refute the extended Church-Turing thesis, we realize the quantum computational advantage and show that quantum computers cannot be efficiently simulated on a Turing machine. Why it is difficult? We need to increase. Why the quantum computing is difficult? We need to increase both the qubit quantity, but more important, qubit qualities. It is a roadmap provided by Google, but applicable to many other physical systems. In 2019, Google developed a quantum processor, Sycamore, with 53 superconducting qubits. Then classical simulation methods have also been developed to challenge Google's quantum advantage. Quantum advantage is not a one-shot experiment proof. It will be a long-term competition between the quantum and the classical. So, what is boson sampling? A classical counterpart is Galton-Board. The output distribution of Galton-Board can be calculated from the input and the struct of Galton-Board. In the quantum case, many photons random walk and interfered in the interferometer. The interference of photons makes it very difficult to classical simulate, even approximate or noisy classical simulation. In 2019, our group demonstrated the state-of-the-art standard boson sampling. Here, we design a 60 modes and 60 mode three-dimensional interferometer. 20 photons are injected into it and samples the output distribution. In the previous experiment, we usually use quantum dot to generate single photons. Another widely used quantum light source is SPDC. The output state is squeezed vacuum state. It is much easier to have an SPDC with high indistinguishability and high collection efficiency simultaneously, but the intrinsic probabilistic limits the application on single photon sources. Like always, where experimentalists make the efforts to develop better and better source circuits and detectors, theorists make it easier and easier to implement. In Gaussian boson sampling, the input state is a squeezed state, and so we can make full use of SPDC. No longer limits on the low gain regime, and the brightness is higher than previous. It is the overall experiment scheme. Laser pumps 25 nonlinear crystals. Laser pump 25 nonlinear crystals, and each generate a 2-mode squeeze state. Then the squeeze states are guided to the 100-mode interferometer. Finally, we use 100 single photon detectors to sample the output states. The SPDC, if we shine a strong ultraviolet laser on a nonlinear crystal, then there is a tiny probability ultraviolet photon will split into 2 infrared photons. To improve the collection efficiency, the emit angle of down conversion photons are engineered from a ring to a Gaussian profile, leading to a high coupling efficiency to single-mode fibers. Next, we move to the joint spectrum. The left one is strongly correlated. Measure the wavelength of the first photon. We can have some information of the second photon. The 2 photons are entangled in frequency. We must filter out the unwanted photon to increase the indistinguishability. By tuning the wavelength and the length of nonlinear crystal, we have made it a circle, eliminating the undesired frequency correlation. Now we only need to use a 30 nanometer wide band filter to filter out the small sideband. The sideband is derived from the sudden change of photon generating rate. If the Gaussian generating rate, if the photon generating rate in the crystal is Gaussian, means that most photons are generated in the middle of crystal and a few photons are generated in the border. There are no sideband in the joint spectrum. It can be achieved by a Gaussian designed PPKTP crystal. It is the scheme of our photon sources. The pump lasers are split into 13 paths and cascadedly pump 2 photon sources. For each photon source, we use 2 mm KTP crystal to compensate the birefringence of the 4 mm PPKTP crystal. In the right bottom, we plot the joint spectrum of this photon source. We build a state-of-the-art 100-mode interferometer. The interferometer is all-to-all full connection with a random and unitary transformation matrix. It is the scheme of the phase locking. Phase locking lasers are collinear with squeezed light and split by a dichroic mirror near the interferometer. The phase locking lasers are combined with reference laser on a polarized beam splitter. Then the relative phase between each path can be read out and feedback control. The fibers are ringed on a piezo cylinder and can stretch. We measure the stability of active phase locking and passive stabilizing. It is our 100-channel SPD. Next, we move to the validation. At first, we need to get the relative phase between each sources. We open 3 input ports each time and block the other ports, sampling the output distribution and calculating the total variation distance to the theoretical distribution with different input phases. As shown in the left figure, the correct relative phases has a minimal distance. To confirm that this method works, we fix the two input ports as reference. The relative phases between the fixed two port keeps stabilizing over the experiment. Then we compare the fitting result with and without phase locking. The figure keeps identity with phase locking, but running very fast without phase locking. This result shows that the method works well. Then we validate in classical regime and quantum regime. In classical regime, 3 input sources are employed. It can be simulated on personal computer. We plot the twofold coincidence distribution of experimental and theoretical results. We calculate the fidelity and the total variation distance. The fidelity is about 99% and the average distance is about 0.1. In classical regime, 3 input sources in quantum regime. Then we move to the quantum regime. We use all the 25 input sources. We exclude several hypotheses, including distinguishable sampling, uniform sampling, and thermal sampling. It is the figure that we exclude the thermal hypothesis up to 40 photon events. It is a comparison between random circuit sampling, Gaussian boson sampling, and classical supercomputer. In random circuit sampling, the bottleneck of classical computer is memory. Several algorithms have been proposed to solve this problem. Theoretically, with the best algorithm, classical computer can calculate the output distribution in 2 days. However, because the probability of all possible output states have been calculated, the classical computer make a comeback when we need 10 billion samples. In Gaussian boson sampling, the output space is much more larger than random circuit sampling. Currently, we have to calculate the output probability for every choice. Thus, the quantum advantage is independent from the number of samples. Here is the recent progress in our group. We achieved Gaussian boson sampling with higher than 100 detected photons. In this experiment, we use stimulated parametric down conversion. With the same laser power, we have 4 times brighter squeeze light. And in this experiment, we use 144 modes interferometer. In the future, we will develop the technique of tunable interferometer and a more compact setup, and to find some application of Gaussian boson sampling. In a word, similar to their experiment, the theory and the experiment develop simultaneously and finally realize the loophole-free experiment. In this work, the sampling machine is 14 orders of magnitude faster than supercomputer. We hope that this work will inspire new theoretical efforts to quantitatively characterize large-scale Gaussian boson sampling, improve the classical simulation strategies, optimize for the realistic parameters, and challenge the observed quantum computational advantage of the 10 to the power of 14 times. Thank you.